Hey everyone, it's Bill with St. Pierre Woodworking. And this week I'm doing something that I have a lot of passion for, and that's reusing old wood. That's salvaging old buildings and taking that material and building something remarkable. We do a lot of different projects, but this week it was something that I really enjoyed. This summer we were asked to take down a barn here in Southwest Virginia, which we do a lot of. And I got a lot of barnwood off this, but there was also some timbers inside, some 6x6 American chestnut timbers that I was really excited about. I knew I had this build coming up. I knew this barn had these timbers in it, and it was going to be perfect for what we're about to build. And again, we salvage usually 80% of these buildings, but there's just a lot of stuff we can't salvage. So here we've got the barn back to the shop. It's already been kiln dried. We're getting the beams out so I can start going through everything and seeing which ones I want to use and where. So we get the beams inside the shop, and it was time to start laying it out, getting the notches cut, figuring out how we're going to do it. And these beams were not perfectly square, so it was really hard to get everything perfect because the beams had some twists. They have checked, which means they've split after they've dried, and they weren't the easiest things to work with. So after a few trials with the bandsaw, I realized I'm probably going to have to do all this with a skill saw. So I was trying to notch everything with the bandsaw. Wasn't going to work because I just didn't have a flat plane to work with. So it was time to go to the skill saw. Laying everything out, putting the beams where I wanted them, marking them so I know which one went where, because this bed had to come completely apart to be moved to its new location. Some of the beams we used were actually heart pine. These beams came off another cabin that we took down that was built around 1820. And we used those beams on the face of the beds because it had that hand-hewn axe look. Getting going, start notching everything out. Using the skill saw, a hammer, and a chisel. It was going to be a long road, but this is the only way I could really do this because I really wanted to do the notches. I wanted to make it look like it was somewhat built 100 years ago. And this is the way our ancestors did it. This is the way they built things with the notches, the mortise and tenons, and the pegs and everything else. We couldn't go that far with the mortise and tenons. The customer only had a small budget, not really a small budget, but he had a budget for this. And for us to do all that work, it was well over his budget. So we were going to just kind of make it look like it was mortise and tenon and pegged. Using our Forstner bit, making it where I can put a peg in this later, a nice round hole, and putting some screws in there to temporarily hold everything. Again, this thing had to be moved. So I kept thinking if there was a way we could prefab some of this and keep some of it together so when we got on site, it wasn't such a hard build, and that's kind of what we did. Needed a few more beams split in half for the back of the bed. Brought them down to the mill, got them cut, got them back up in there, and it was back to notching where these beams were going to be placed. This was wearing me out. This was something that is telling me, hey, Bill, you're getting older. Doing this all day long with the chisels, and I keep thinking back, how did our ancestors, our forefathers, do this kind of work? They didn't have a skill saw. They didn't have table saws. They had axes and chisels and hammers, and they made it happen. And they probably never complained. But here we're getting the bed together, getting it where I want it. I kept stepping back and looking at it, changing a little bit here and there. And then we took a few pieces of the American chestnut from the beams that we had notched out and started making these plugs. So I brought them up to the lathe, got everything turned down the way I wanted it. I wanted them to kind of like you chiseled it. You made it with a knife or something. Basically the way they used to do it. They didn't have a bandsaw. So I'm just taking the sander and putting these little marks on the end to make it look like it was sort of cut with a knife. Again, it's really not all, I'm not trying to make this thing fake, but I'm trying to make it feasible where it's sort of in someone's budget. Getting everything cut off the back, we were able to let some pieces overhang and then we could kind of cut them where we wanted to. This is not finished carpentry. As you can see, I'm using a Sawzall to cut this thing, finish cutting this thing to length because the skill saw wouldn't cut through it. Marking things out where we're going to notch it, getting the finished notches done. And at this time, I'm thinking, okay, no more notches. I'm done with notches. We probably had a total of 30 notches in this bed. I'm not complaining. It came out great the way we did it, and it was just a lot of work to make it look like this. So the American chestnut obviously died back in the 30s and 40s when the blight hit. These beams were put in this barn before that because they weren't really wormy. They didn't have that wormy chestnut look. They were more of a virgin chestnut. So they were just beautiful beams and really excited to be able to use these. Taking some long 4.5-inch screws, making sure everything's fastened up tight, numbering every piece as we went along, putting the pegs in, these are the pieces that will stay together. We weren't worried about having to take those pegs back out, but needed some barnwood for underneath the upper bunk. So when you looked up, you saw the barnwood. Had to finish denailing a few more boards. Got them in the shop, got them cleaned up. And it was onto the staircase. Now, I am no carpenter, okay? I've been building furniture and doing different things, but when it comes to laying out stairs, that is not my expertise. I figured it out. I made a little jig for my plunge router, got everything kind of figured out where it was going to work great. It probably took me, and I'm going to be honest, I want to say 2.5 hours to lay this thing out. So all my treads were at the right height. They were hitting the floor and hitting the top at the same time. And I know all the carpenters are saying, well, there's a method to that. And I know there is. But sometimes I have so many different things going through my mind. I think I've forgotten more than I know sometimes. So getting the staircase cut to size, getting the bottom pieces cut. Again, going back to this handsaw because I couldn't get all the way through it, but this was an easy cut. And start putting the staircase together. I'm just basically taking these screws and burying them in the wood. I'm not going to add small pegs to that because you're really not going to see them the way they're going to be positioned in between the two bunk beds. Putting some blue tape on here only because when I put this stretcher on, I'm going to be gluing the stair treads in here, and I didn't want that glue getting on my stretcher. So hoping everything fits, and then bam, fit like a glove. Got it together, finally, take the tape off. Kind of excited to put the stairs because this is what's going to tie the beds together and give it that finished look. And I was excited to this was on a Sunday, and I was trying to get this bed done because I wanted this thing to be delivered on Monday. So pushing through it, getting the tape off, and then I had to carry these because I'm working by myself over to the staircase. Then I realized, okay, these things probably weigh 200 pounds, but I could drag them, which I did, and somehow they fit in there perfectly. Got the staircase in there. Wasn't quite in where I wanted it, but it was close enough so I could see what it was going to look like. Adding a couple finishing touches. I decided after looking at the bed, it needs some braces. It needs something to kind of add a little bit more feature to it, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm just adding some braces, a couple screws. Look great. Didn't like the wood that we cut on the sawmill because it was that new chestnut look. It didn't match. So it was either add a little stain or add a little heat. So I chose the heat, burned them up a little bit, aged it a little bit. Looks great. Doing some finish and sanding. Got to remember there's going to be bare feet going up and down these stairs. So we're trying to get all the slivers out. We are not putting a finish on this bed. We are leaving this bed raw, which I was excited to hear because I did not want to put a finish on it. Getting to the client's home, getting turned around and getting ready to unload, and let's start putting this thing together. The team came with me. We were able to leave the end pieces all together. That's why you see the pegs already in there, because we left those together and carried those down around the front of the house and somehow got them in there and stood up. We had about 4 inches to spare on the ceiling, and I should have called the client and asked them, hey, how tall are your ceilings? Luckily, we had 4 inches to spare. The bed fit in there perfect, putting the finishing touches on, and then once again, it was time for the stairs. We carried the stairs in, fit perfectly, got them in there, got them screwed into place, and this thing was about done. The client had still not seen this bed yet. He had just arrived when we finished it, which is kind of like what I like. I don't like them seeing the whole build. I like them seeing the finished project. And even to me, standing back and looking at this and thinking about the barn that I just tore down, what it looked like and what it looks like now is just amazing. And I love repurposing salvaged wood, whether it's old logs or old beams, to be able to do something like this. This was a fun project, but this next one takes things to a whole new level.